friends, to this Utah tale of candy, sweets, and chocolate, with all that is good to eat. Oh, silly Billy I am. This is my world and not our tale. Let me introduce myself. I am the Sugar Plum Fairy. You'll see I'm quite merry. I love this time of year so much that I get a sugar rush, especially when I tell a tale like this. One of magic, adventure, toys that come to life, and of course, love. So with a wave of my wand, here begins the tale of the Nutcracker. Dr. Starborn's children had not been allowed into the dining room, much less into the drawing room opening out on it. In a corner of the back parlour, Fred and Mary sat cuddled up together, shuddering with excitement. Fred whisperingly told his 7-year-old sister how, since early in the morning, he had listened to the stir and the bustle and the soft hammerings of those forbidden chambers. Also, how, not long ago, a small dark man with a great box under his arm had come slipping over the floor. But he knew well that this was nobody else than Godfather Drosselmeyer.
What fine things will Godfather Drosselmeyer have made for us?
Councillor Drosselmeyer, so people called him, was far from a handsome man. Short and thin, with many wrinkles on his face, and a great black patch where his right eye should have been. Also, he had no hair on his head, so he wore a very fine white wig, which seemed to be all made of glass, so clever a piece of work was it. The godfather himself, indeed, was a very clever workman who actually knew all about clocks and could even make them with his own hands. When any of the fine clocks in the Stahlbaum's house went out of order and did not strike, Godfather Drosselmeyer would come, take off his glass wig and his drab coat, tie on a blue apron, and stick sharp things into the clocks inside, so that little Mary felt quite sorry for it. But this did the clock no harm, which, on the contrary, got to life again, and at once began to tick, strike, and chime, to the delight of all the family. He never came without bringing something pretty in his pockets for the children. Now a puppet that could move its eyes and make bows, most comic to behold. Now a box out of which would hop a little bird, or something else of that kind. But for Christmas, he always prepared some grand, elaborate piece of work that cost him much trouble, on which account, when given to the children, it was carefully taken charge of by their parents.
This time there has to be a castle for me, in which all kinds of beautiful soldiers march up and down and protects it from the other soldiers outside it, trying to get in with powerful cannons banging. Boom, boom!
Godfather Drosselmeyer has told me of a beautiful garden with a great pond in it, on which splendid swans with gold bands around their necks are to swim about and sing such pretty songs. Then a little girl will run up from the garden and call the swans to her and feed them with gingerbread.
Swans don't eat gingerbread, and Godfather Drosselmeyer could not make a whole garden either. Anyhow, we get few of the toys he makes. They are always taken away from us. So I like much better the things Papa and Mama give us, which we have for our very own and can do as we like with them.
Then the children went on guessing and guessing. What would it be this time?
My big doll is much changed for the worse, since she keeps tumbling on the floor more awkwardly than ever, which never happens without leaving dirty marks on her face. And as for keeping her clothes clean, that's out of the question. All scoldings in the world thrown away on her.
Mary, Fred, let me remind you that it is Father Christmas who, through the hands of our dear parents, always supply what will afford us real joy and pleasure, as he knows better how to do than children themselves, who should therefore not be wishing and hoping for all sorts of things, but quietly and dutifully await what is to be given them.
You are right, Louisa, as always.
I should like a horse and some hussars, though.
All at once, a silvery bell went cling, cling. The doors flew open, and such a brilliance streamed out of the great room that the children stood as if enchanted on the threshold, with loud exclamations of wonder.
Fred, Mary, come along, dear children, and see what Father Christmas has given you.
I put it to you, my friends, and beg you to bring clearly before your eyes your own last Christmas tree or table adorned with pretty gay presents. Then you can very well understand how these children stopped, dumbfounded, with sparkling eyes, how only after a little Mary cried with a deep sigh of delight.
Oh, how beautiful! Oh, how beautiful!
Fred jumped for joy to relieve his feelings. All the past year, indeed, they must have been particularly good and well behaved, for never had they had such a number of delightful presents as this time. The great fir tree in the middle bore ever so many gold and silver apples, and for buds and blossoms every branch hung thick with almonds and brightly coloured sugar plums and other best kinds of goodies. Mary caught sight of the most elegant dolls. What seemed finest of all, a silk frock, prettily decked with coloured ribbons, stood spread out on a dress stand before her eyes, so that she could admire it from every side, as she did, crying out again and again.
Oh, the pretty! Oh, the dear dress! Oh, and may I really put it on?
What else can it be used for? Sweeping the floor? Of course you may.
Fred, galloping and trotting round 3 or 4 times, tried his new cock horse, which he indeed found bridled and saddled on the table. Dismounting, he reported that it was a wild creature.
No matter, I will soon break it in.
The children had got over their excitement a little and were able to take a look at the picture books which lay open so as to display pretty flowers and brightly coloured figures of people, even of dear little children at play, painted as naturally as if they really lived and spoke. Kling-ling! Kling-ling! The bell rang again. They knew that now it was Godfather Drosselmeyer's turn, and ran to the table standing by the wall. The screen that had so long concealed it was quickly drawn away. And what did they see? On a green lawn, bespangled with gay flowers, stood a most noble castle, all plate glass windows and gilded towers. A chime of bells was heard. Doors and windows flew open. Then you saw how very tiny but most elegant ladies and gentlemen, with feathers in their hats and trailing skirts, moved inside the rooms. In the central hall, that seemed to be on fire, so many lights burned there in silver chandeliers. Children wearing short coats and vests were dancing to the music of the chimes. A gentleman in an emerald green cloak kept looking out through a window, nodding and disappearing by turns, while a figure, just like Godfather Drosselmeyer himself, but scarcely higher than Papa's thumb, would from time to time come and stand at the castle door and then go in again.
Godfather Drosselmeyer, will you let me go into your castle?
This would never do.
Indeed, he spoke truly, for it was foolish of Fred to want to go into a castle which, gilded towers and all, was not so high as himself. Fred had to admit that. After a time, as the ladies and gentlemen went on walking up and down in the same way, the children dancing, the green man looking out of the window, Godfather Drosselmeier's likeness coming to the door.
Godfather Drosselmeier, now will you come out for once at the other door?
That won't do, dear Fred.
Well, just make the green man, who looks out so often, walk about with the others.
That won't do either.
Couldn't the children come downstairs? I should like to see them nearer.
Oh, that won't do. The machinery has to work as it is made.
Is that the way of it? Nothing will do? I tell you what, Godfather Drosselmeier, if your fine little figures in the castle can only go on doing the same things, they are not worth much, and I don't particularly care about them. No, I would rather have my hussars. They can manoeuvre forwards, backwards, as I like, and not shut up in a house.
And with this he ran to the table and made his squadron on the silver horses trot up and down, and wheel and charge, and shoot to his heart's content. Mary also had quietly slipped away, for she too soon grew tired of the strutting and capering of the puppets in the castle, but was so polite and good-natured that she would not show it so plainly as her brother Fred. Councillor Drosselmeier spoke rather crossly to the parents.
Such a skillful contrivance is not for senseless children. I will pack up my castle and...
Oh, will you not show my husband and I how it is all put together? He does love seeing how it all works. Don't you, dear?
Yes, dear.
The councillor took it all to pieces and put it together again. This put him into a rather better temper, and he presented the children, furthermore, with some pretty brown men and women made of gingerbread, with gilt faces, hands and legs, which quite delighted them. Sister Louisa had, by her mother's wish, put on the handsome dress which was her present, and looked very nice in it. But when Mary was to try on her new frock, she thought she would rather look at it a little longer, and they allowed her to have her own way. Mary, in fact, could not tear herself away from the table of presents, since she had just discovered on it something till now unseen. The marching off of Fred's soldiers, previously paraded close in front of the Christmas tree, left exposed to view a very remarkable little man who stood still in the background, as if quietly awaiting his turn for notice. His figure, indeed, was not much to be proud of, for besides that his rather long, thick body by no means fitted his small, thin legs, his head also seemed far too big. His nice clothes, however, which bespoke a person of taste and cultivation, went far to make up for this deformity, as Mary kept looking harder and harder at this mannikin, who had quite taken her heart at first sight. She came to perceive what a kindly nature was expressed on his countenance.
Papa, who is to have this dearest little man on the Christmas tree?
That fellow, my dear child, is to make himself useful to you all. His work is to crack hard nuts for you, and he belongs to Louisa as much as to Fred and to you.
With this, her father carefully took the figure off the table, and lifting up its wooden cloak, made the mannikin's mouth gape open to show 2 rows of very sharp white teeth. Then he told Mary to put in a nut, and crack! The man had crushed it, so that the shell fell in pieces and Mary got the small kernel in her hand. Now Mary and all might know that the elegant little man belonged to the race of nutcrackers and practiced the profession of his ancestors. The little girl cried out for joy.
Since friend Nutcracker pleases you so much, dear Mary, he shall be your special charge and pet. Though, as I said, Louisa and Fred have as much right to use him as you.
Mary at once took him into her arms and made him crack nuts, yet picking out the smallest ones, in order that the mannikin might not have to stretch his mouth so wide open, which was not good for him. Louisa came to look, and for her also friend Nutcracker had to perform his service, which he seemed to do with good will, for he kept on smiling in the most amiable way. Meanwhile, Fred had grown tired of all his riding and drilling, so when he heard such a pleasant cracking of nuts, he ran to his sisters and laughed heartily as the funny little man, who as Fred also liked to eat nuts, passed from Fred, always kept shoving in the biggest and hardest nuts. But all of a sudden, there was a crack, crick, then 3 teeth fell out of Nutcracker's mouth, and his underjaw went loose and wobbly. Mary cried.
Oh, my poor dear Nutcracker!
What a silly, stupid fellow! Sets up for being a nutcracker and hasn't a good set of grinders. He doesn't seem to be very first rate at his business. Hand him over, Mary. He should go on cracking nuts for me, even though he loses all his teeth and his whole chin into the bargain, which is what such a good-for-nothing deserves.
No, no! You are not to have him, my dear Nutcracker. Just see how sadly he looks at me and shows his sore little mouth. But you are a cruel boy. You beat your horse and have your soldiers shot.
That's what should be. You don't understand these things, but the Nutcracker belongs to me as much as you. Hand him over here.
Mary began to cry bitterly and made haste to wrap up the wounded Nutcracker in her small pocket handkerchief.
I have put Nutcracker under Mary's protection, and since, as I see, he now needs it, she has full power over him, and nobody is to say a word against her. Besides, I am very much surprised at Fred that he should require fresh duty of a man injured on service. As a good soldier, he ought to know that wounded men are never put back in the ranks.
Fred was much ashamed of himself, and without troubling further about nuts or Nutcracker, slipped off to the other side of the table, where his soldiers had been posted for the night, after putting out the proper pickets. Mary picked up Nutcracker's lost teeth. Around his hurt chin, she bound a nice white ribbon taken off her dress, and then wrapped the poor little fellow, who looked very wan and dejected, more carefully than ever in her pocket handkerchief. Thus she held him, rocking him like a baby in her arms, while she turned over the pretty picture books which lay among the rest of the presents. She became quite cross, as was not at all usual with her, when Godfather Drosselmeier laughed a great deal.
How can you go on so with that hideous little creature?
Who knows, Godfather, whether if you were to make yourself as fine as my dear Nutcracker and had as nice shiny boots on, who knows whether you would look as pretty as he does?
Mary did not understand why her parents laughed so loud, or why the councillor got so red in the face and did not join in the laugh as heartily as before. There may have been some particular reason for this. Now, In the parlour at Dr. Stalbourne's, on the left-hand side as you go in at the door, stood a high glass cupboard where the children kept all those fine things that were given them every Christmas. It was late in the evening, getting on for midnight, and Godfather Drosselmeyer had long gone home, and that the children could not tear themselves away from the glass cupboard, for all their mothers telling them it was time to go to bed.
To tell the truth, my soldiers would like some rest now. And so long as I am looking at them, I know that not one of them dare nod.
Only a little while, dear mother. Let me stay here only a little longer. I have so much still to look after. As soon as I have finished, I will go straight to bed.
Come soon to bed, dear Mary, or you will not be up in good time in the morning.
When Mary found herself alone, she quickly set about what she had in mind to do, at which she hardly herself knew why she did not care to be seen by her mother. At this time she had been nursing the injured Nutcracker in her arms, wrapped in a handkerchief. Now she laid him carefully upon the table, softly, softly unwrapped him, and examined his hurts. Nutcracker was very pale, but yet he smiled with such an air of melancholy kindness that it went right to Mary's heart.
Oh, dear little Nutcracker, don't be angry with my brother Fred for hurting you so much. He did not mean any great harm. He is only rather unfeeling through that rough soldier life. But in other ways, a real kind-hearted boy, I can assure you. But now I will take very good care of you till you have grown quite well and happy again. Your teeth shall be put firm and your shoulders set straight by Godfather Drosselmeyer, who understands these things.
So Mary was going to say, but could not finish the sentence, for as she mentioned the name of Drosselmeyer, friend Nutcracker made an ugly, cross face, and his eyes seemed to shoot out green sparkles. Then, just as Mary was ready to feel terrified out of her wits, there again she saw the worthy Nutcracker's face as placid as ever, with its melancholy smile. And now she knew that a draught in the room, making the lamp flicker, must have transmogrified his countenance for a moment.
Am I not a foolish girl to be so easily frightened? I actually believed this wooden figure was making faces at me. But I am really getting so fond of Nutcracker. He is such a funny and such a good-natured fellow, and so he must be properly nursed as he deserves.
With this, she took Nutcracker on her arm, approached the glass cupboard, bent down before it, and thus addressed the new doll.
I beg you very particularly, Missy Clara, to give up your bed to the sick, wounded Nutcracker, and manage as well as you can on the sofa.
Missy Clara, in all her Christmas finery, looked very stuck up and sulky, and did not answer a word. Mary bound his injured shoulder with a ribbon from her own dress, and said to herself,
Why should I make so much work about it? He is not to say beside that naughty Clara.
With this, she lifted bed, Nutcracker, and all onto the shelf above. She shut up the cupboard and was going off to her bedroom when there began a soft, soft whispering and stirring and rustling all around her, behind the stove, behind the chairs, behind the cupboard. The clock ticked louder and louder and gave a whir, as if it was going to strike, but did not. Mary looked at it. The great gilded owl, which sat on the top, had let down its wings so as to cover the whole clock face, at the same time stretching out its ugly cat-like face and its hooked beak. And more loudly came the ticks, as plain as words.
Clock, clock, click, low, softly tick. Mouse King's ears are quick. Purr, purr, ting tong, sing out the old song, but strike in a low tone. It will be over soon.
And purr, whir went the clock 12 times, but dully and hoarsely, as if its notes were muffled. Mary saw how Godfather Drosselmeyer seemed to have taken the place of the owl, his drab coat skirts hanging down on both sides like wings. Yet she made an effort to be brave.
Godfather Drosselmeyer? Godfather Drosselmeyer, whatever are you doing up there? Come down and don't frighten me so terribly, you naughty Godfather Drosselmeyer.
But now there broke out from all sides a wild creaking and squeaking, and soon, behind the walls, there was a trotting and galloping as of 1,000 tiny feet, and 1,000 little lights shone through the chinks in the floor. There were no tapers, no, but small, sparkling eyes, and Mary perceived that a host of mice were everywhere, peeping forth and working themselves out. Then, all at once there came a squeak so piercing and startling that an ice-cold shudder ran down her back. Ah, that is just what Mary could not do. For, would you believe it, right under her feet burst up sand and lime and crumbled stone, and from the floor arose 7 mouse heads with 7 glittering crowns, hissing and squeaking terribly. Before long, the body also squeezed itself clear, on the neck of which grew these 7 heads, and the huge 7-crowned mouse shrieked with all its throats, 3 times piping out a greeting to his army, that at once set itself in motion and charged, trot, trot, pit, pit, dot, dot, straight upon the cupboard, straight upon Mary, who still stood by its glass front. The girl's heart had been beating so violently for distress and terror that she believed it would soon burst out of her bosom, and that she would die. But now all the blood seemed to freeze in her veins. Half fainting, she staggered back. Something went clear, crack, crash, and the pane of the cupboard, which she had struck with her elbow, was shivered to pieces.
Squeak! 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 Awake! Awake! Arms to take! This is the night! Rise for a fight!
And then pealed out a pleasant, pretty chime of bells.
That is my little bell toy.
All of a sudden, Nutcracker jumped up, threw the blankets far away, and sprang to his feet on the bed, shouting loudly his war cry of defiance.
Nick, knack, knack, stupid mousy pack, crick, crack, whack, hew, hick and hack. You, my dear vassals, friends and brothers, will you stand by me in the hard battle?
Yes, Lord, we hold to you with steadfast loyalty.
With you we march to combat.
To victory or death!
And they pressed after the Nutcracker, who ventured a dangerous spring from the upper shelf. They, for their part, could well manage the jump, but the poor Nutcracker, he would surely have broken arms and legs, for, remember, it was nearly 2 feet high from the shelf on which he stood to the one below, and his body was as brittle as if cut out of matchwood. Yes, Nutcracker would surely have broken his limbs, had not, at that moment he leaped down, Missy Clara sprung from the sofa, and in her soft arms received the hero with his drawn sword.
Oh, dear kind Clara, how have I mistaken you? I am sure you must have given up your bed to friend Nutcracker with goodwill, after all.
And now, Mrs. Clara said, pressing the young hero gently to her silken breast.
Oh, sir, will you, sick and wounded as you are, yet expose yourself to combat and peril? See how eager for the fray are your bold vassals, and how they troop themselves for certain of victory. The toys are already down below on the field, and the motto figures in my compartment are all astir, preparing for the fight. Will you not, dear sir, rest in my arms, or behold the battle from the top of my high feather hat?
Thus spoke Clara, but Nutcracker behaved quite roughly, kicking so hard with his legs that the doll had soon to let him go and set him on the ground. Immediately then he knelt gallantly on one knee, murmuring out,
Fair lady, ever in the thick of the combat will I remember the grace and favour thou hast shown me.
At this, Clara bent down so low that she could seize him by both arms, lifted him softly up, made haste to loosen her rich spangled girdle, and would have thrown it over his shoulder if he had not taken 2 steps backwards, laying his hand upon his breast and speaking with formal politeness.
Do not deign, O lady, to waste your favours on me.
Here he stopped short, sighed deeply, tore from his shoulder the ribbon with which Mary had bandaged him, pressed it to his lips, hung it round him as his lucky charm, then, bravely brandishing his glittering unsheathed sword, sprang, light and active as a bird, over the ledge of the cupboard onto the Doom. Nutcracker, even before he really became alive, must have deeply felt the affectionate goddess with which Mary had treated him, and on this account only, because Mary was so kind, he would not take or wear a token from Missy Clara, splendid and beautiful as it was. The true-hearted Nutcracker chose rather to adorn himself with Mary's simple ribbon. As soon as Nutcracker sprang down, the squeaking and pattering broke out again. Under the big table swarmed the deadly squadrons of countless mice, and over all towers the frightful 7-headed Mouse King. How will the battle go? This I cannot tell you, sweet friends. For this our tale must take a small pause. And no, not mouse paws. But before I get into more cheesy repartee, I bid you farewell until next time.